Good morning to everybody. Good morning also to our participants online. Good morning. Before we start, I would like to thank, on behalf of the scientific committee and of the organizing committee and of all MOISA members, Sylvain, for hosting our first post-pandemic meeting, for making us feeling welcome, and for pampering us with this wonderful booklet, which has revealed all the mysteries of musical archaeological treasures in Strasbourg, and also for his opening bright and moving at the end. Thank you, Sylvain, so much, and please, we give him an applause. Now it's time to start. Alessia D'Angrando is coming from the University of Bologna. She is a PhD student, and this morning she will begin our session. So, Alessia, take the floor, please.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry not to be able to be there with you, but I'm thankful to Professor Perrault for letting me speak online. So I'll try to share my screen.
Yeah.
Do you see the full
Fine.
screen?
Yes, fine.
Okay, perfect. So since the beginning of 2021, I have been collaborating with the TEMA project set up by the Department of Cultural Heritage of the University of Padua, which is in dialogue and cooperation with the French-Italian project RIMAND. The TEMA project pursues the goal of identifying and mapping the material musical evidence of the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman cultural traditions, with particular reference to the museums and collections of the Veneto, Trentino, and Friuli-Venezia Giulia regions. Thanks to this collaboration, I had the opportunity to discover many collections of the Friuli-Venezia Giulia region, my area of interest, and thus to have access to the museum's holdings and the numerous finds stored in the depots. A large part of these archaeological artifacts, in addition to a variety of epigraphic testimonies, and to altars, stele, vases, gems, and many other objects enriched with iconographic representations, date back to the Roman period and reflect the great diversity of the cultural context to which they belong. These finds can provide information about religious practices and beliefs, about the social status and cultural identity of ancient musicians, but also about musical traditions and cultural exchange. This applies, for example, to the finds related to the Cult of Mitra, which is attested in the Friuli-Venezia Giulia region, exclusively in Aquileia and Trieste. As we all know, Aquileia was a crucial Roman emporium in Decima Reggio, Venezia et Istria, and a multicultural city located on the Amber route, but also connected to the sea routes to Greece and Asia Minor through the river Natissa. The Roman Tergeste, on the other hand, was an important port on the Adriatic Sea. Thanks to the geographical position and their commercial role, various Oriental cults are attested in both cities, such as the cults of Isis, Serapis, and Mitra, in addition to the traditional Roman pantheon. Indeed, some finds and inscriptions confirm the worshipping of Magna Mater or Cybele, the mountain goddess, the mistress of lions, who was worshipped to the sound of sacred instruments that produce violent and orgiastic music. But also Attis, her Paredros, often depicted as a figure with chthonic and vegetal features, or later presented as a god associated with the idea of celestial immortality of the soul, situated in the process of transformation which he experienced. As for the presence of the cult of the Magna Mater in Trieste, The first findings date back to the 17th century, when the historian Ireneo della Croce wrote about a stone building, later demolished, found not far from the Richard's Arch. Later, in 1913, Pietro Sticotti organized some excavations in the same area, which revealed a complex stratigraphy and part of the walls built under Ottaviano's rule. Also discovered was a structure with 4 rooms, one of which had a semicircular shape, an apse, and whose construction indicated that it was built around the 2nd century AD. But the similarities with the structure of the basilica suggested rather an earlier chronology and dated the structure around the 1st century AD. At the time of the excavations, Sticotti interpreted this space as a market or basilica, while a few years later Mario Mirabella Roberti suggested the presence of a thermal structure. Finally, Paolo Casari recently suggested that these structures could also correspond to a meeting place used by the Roman collegia. The common interpretation of the structure, however, goes in the direction of a temple dedicated to Magna Mater, as suggested by the epigraphic evidence dated between the 1st and 2nd century AD, which, although sparse compared to that found in Aquileia, is more specific and seems to indicate the presence of the official cult. 5 fragments of an epistyle with the dedication of the temple to Magna Mater, an altar dedicated to Matrin Deum Magnae by Ustia Tertullina, Sacerdos Divarum, an inscription identifying an Archigallus, found in Capodistria, would be copper, close to Slovenia, and a votive inscription dedicated to the Prospoloi gods by Lucanus Severus, as suggested by the Antistes, servants of the cult. Moreover, a hexagonal altar, unfortunately lost, was found around the middle of the 19th century and dated between the 1st and 2nd century AD, while the inscription mentions a dedication to the Magna Mater by a sacerdos, an editus, a person responsible for the temple, and a symbalistrian. The discussion about the existence of the cult of Magna Mater in Aquileia is different. As for the archaeological evidence, such as a series of metopes, probably decorating a funerary monument, the relief with the so-called Pompa del Magistrato, and a statue of the goddess reused in a wall of a present hotel, these finds give no indication of the presence of or the spread of the Metroac cult in the city, since the original context of the finds is unknown. The same applies to the 2 bronze symbols, which are different from each other and could have been used in multiple contexts, including rites dedicated to Magna Mater or Dionysus. In contrast to other known examples, which were sometimes inscribed and dedicated to the gods as votive offerings, in this case we cannot assign the 2 objects to any specific use, as we have no indication of the place of discovery or any inscription on the surface, as also the general catalog of the cultural heritage shows. A second find consists of a bronze figure depicting Attis with a symbol in each hand. The small statue has already been attested by Vermeijeren, who considered it lost. In this case, as with the 2 symbols mentioned and 4 other archaeological finds, the lacking of information precludes the possibility of proceeding with further considerations. On the other hand, the analysis of the epigraphic evidence suggests that the veneration of Magna Mater, or Mater Magna, began in the Claudian-Neronian age, which corresponds to the reorganization of the cult and the urban renewal of Aquileia. Until the 1980s, only 8 inscriptions dedicated to the Mater Magna Deorum were known. Almost all of them were found reused in the area of Monastero, in the northeastern part of the city, near to one of the city gates and to the fluvial port. These texts, dated between the 1st and 2nd century AD, show no reference to the priesthood other than the worshippers, mostly freedmen, and an antistides referring to a category of ministers of the cult known in this area. On the other hand, the epithet Cereria is also known as an attribute of Bonadea and establishes a connection between the two deities, which in the Hellenistic Roman world were assimilated to Demetra Ceres as the mother of the gods and the protector of the fruits of the earth. In 1855, a fragmentary base dedicated to Mater Magna was found reused in the remains of St. Martin's Abbey, that is south of Aquileia in the area of Biligna. Although it is not possible to interpret the missing text with certainty, the formula Pro Salute is also attested in other dedications to Mater Magna, especially in relation to the salvation of the emperor or of soldiers and officers. Two other finds of uncertain origin are mentioned by Brusin and Zaccaria, of which the first consists of fragments of an epistyle found in 1891 on Julia Augusta Street. The second inscription was engraved on an altar whose original context is unknown. But the integration proposed by Brusin would suggest that the two fragments might belong to the same epistyle. This hypothesis could also suggest the dedication of a building to the goddess, and that would be an act already attested in Trieste. Finally, between 1982 and 1988, a series of inscriptions dated between the 1st and 2nd centuries AD were found incorporated into the early Christian pavement of the first baptistery of Aquileia. 3 votive inscriptions are dedicated to the Mater Deum Magnae and 1 to Bellona. On the second inscription, we can read the formula Locus Datus Decreto Decurionum, which indicates that the altar had to be placed in a public area and probably it housed a statue. Moreover, this wording provides that the cult in Aquileia was public. The third one corresponds to the first dedication to Bellona found in Aquileia, which refers to the Roman interpretation of the Oriental goddess Ma, assimilated to Bellona Italica and associated in Italy with the cult of Mater Magna Idea. In fact, the theophoric cognomen Ide might refer to the epithet Idea attributed to Mount Ida, where the cult of Magna Mater was practiced. The epigraphic documentation on this cult, however, still does not help in the exact location of the Mitroic temple. The areas where it could have stood are the area of Beligna, south of the city, or more likely the area of Monastero, in the northeastern part of the city, near one of the gates and the fluvial port, possibly related to the function of protector of the city gates and navigation. Finally, the area by the baptistery of Aquileia could also house the temple of the Mother of the Gods, but Claudio Zaccaria excludes the hypothesis of a simple reuse of the dedication to Mater Magna in the Paleochristian structures, since this action would rather represent a deliberate act of exauguration that took place after the Theodosian edicts and was addressed in particular to the soteriological religions that could compete with the Christian one. The pagan cults would so be publicly injured by using the inscriptions for the flooring of the Christian buildings. However, according to Federica Fontana, this hypothesis should be treated with caution because if there was a temple in the area south of the Forum, the materials could be simply reused in many contexts, for example, in residential buildings, which were also highlighted around the Battistero. In the inscriptions we have seen, there is no evidence of the Phrygian festivals or of the Taurobolia. However, as suggested by Claudio Zaccaria again, the presence of the College of Dendrophori should indicate that the members of this group were involved in the Arbor Intrat rite, the transport of the pine tree consecrated to Attis, characteristic of the celebrations of the Magna Mater on the 22nd of March. This could then imply a direct connection with the veneration of the Phrygian hero, who could be associated with the concepts of death and rebirth. As already mentioned, the first evidence of this presence in Aquileia dates from the Republican period and consists of an altar dedicated to Attis Papa by a worshipper of Phrygian or Anatolian origin and dated to the 2nd or 1st century BC. We also know some examples of statues of a standing or seated Attis Tristis, shaped all around and possibly associated with the Aquileian funerary monuments, which were probably placed in niches or in independent and enclosed funerary areas. This version of the Phrygian hero is very common between the 1st and 2nd century AD, also in the Istrian city of Salona, where it is widely attested, and always depicted without the syrinx or any other musical instrument. But in one case, the last one on the right, a pillar found near Portogruaro, would be Concordia Sagittaria, in the Veneto region, he could hold a sort of simplified syrinx, but it's just a hypothesis. The syrinx is also represented on a relief showing a different type of Attis with mantle and pedum. The relief was found near the Roman theatre of Trieste, but nothing more is known about this object. So, Cibele and Attis could be invoked as guarantors of the inviolability of tombs, especially in Asia Minor, but this custom does not necessarily mean a protective action on the soul in the afterlife. As Annalisa De Franzoni claims, we should consider the fact that Attis could also be confused with the figure of the Oriental shepherd, often used in the funerary and domestic context. In any case, it is clear that the presence of Attis does not always suggest a direct link with his cult, as the figure of Attis Tristis could also recall the Oriental slaves or the grave keepers, but also the sad erotes with the crossed legs and the torch, thus symbolizing mourning and distress. The situation of the deceased is thus obviously linked with that aspect of suffering and of death which characterizes the fate of the young Phrygian shepherd. So to conclude, from this, we can conclude that in Trieste and Aquileia, the cult of Mater Magna in the capital of the Decima Regio had probably assumed some peculiarities, which would be evidenced by the aforementioned epithet Cereria, attributed to Mater Magna. This particular attribute would then also include the metrical aspects, suggesting a connection with the agricultural cycle and with harvests. We should then consider the cult of Cybele in Aquileia as independent from the official Roman cult. Attis, on the other hand, is already attested and was worshipped as Atte Papa in the Republican period. These elements suggest that the Metroic cult of Aquileia could be of Hellenic or Asian origins, while in Trieste it could be more associated with the Roman imperial ritual. Some musical instruments could have been used in the worship of Mater Magna, Magna Mater, or Attis, both in Aquileia and Tergeste, as the presence of the College of Dendrophori in Aquileia and the mention of Secunda Cimbalistria in an inscription found in Trieste would suggest. As for archaeological finds related to the sound sphere, the artifacts housed in the collection of the National Archaeological Museum of Aquileia could be linked to the presence of music in the rites dedicated to the Mater Magna or Attis, but we cannot be sure of this connection, and we will need more data to confirm this hypothesis. Certainly, we should be cautious about associating the figure of Attis with the cult of Mater Magna. As Annalisa De Franzoni has noted, we must bear in mind, above all, the roles of Cybele and Attis, that the roles of Cybele and Attis are not clearly defined, either in Aquileia or Trieste. We cannot, therefore, consider them as a whole and unite them in one and the same cult. Nevertheless, the possible soteriological connection would be plausible if both Attis Tristis and Attis Hilaris would be represented, alternating the moment of mourning and the moment of joy, so of disappearance and presence. Finally, Attis Tristis could be associated with a kind of funerary iconographic tradition rather than with the salvific values of the cult of Attis, associated with resurrection and immortality. The same applies to the depictions of Attis with the Syrinx found in the area of the Roman theatre of Trieste, where the presence of the Syrinx suggests more of a pastoral use and for which, unfortunately, there is still little evidence to express other hypotheses. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, suggestions to this very open presentation with very cautious and with small objects and a few inscriptions, but useful to collect new hypotheses on music in mysteries in that region. Yes, please, Francesco.
With the microphone. Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. I noticed that there are a lot of soldiers in the inscriptions, soldiers' names, at any case. Could it be, may we speak about connection between participation in the mystery cults and military? Or is it just a case, or how do you can explain it?
I think, first of all, I think we should consider also the other cults and the inscriptions related to the other cults. But as far as I know, there are many soldiers related to the cult of Mitra in Aquileia, and probably because these soldiers came back from the campaigns in the Orient, and so probably they came in contact with this cult. So I think it would be plausible. Yes.
So it would be. It would mean that probably soldiers were initiated in Orient.
It could, but I think that to answer your question, we should consider a great amount of evidence. But I think it's possible.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, any other? Okay. So thank you again, Alessia Zangrando.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now the great chief, the commander-in-chief of our conference, will have the floor.
So good morning, everybody. Welcome again in this conference. So I would like to enjoy the opportunity of the conference to present to you our project, which is a database of all the remains of ancient Greek, Egyptian, and Roman music instruments, which is actually also a collaboration with the project Tema Alicia Zangrando was speaking about. And so I will present you the database, the principles of the database, and of course show some few examples which are actually the corpus of ancient Greek remains related to sanctuaries with mystery cults. Some of you have already heard about Rimond, but I will go from the very beginning, but quickly about the principles, and then show you actually the database. So Rimond is not only one person. Actually, you have two on the stage here, and three if we also add the room. It's so a collaboration, a Franco-Italian collaboration between so Daniela Castaldo, Sybille Emery, me, Donatella Restani, Christophe Vendry, and Alexandre Vincent. And Rimond, as you can see here, means Repertorium Musicorum Instrumentorum Antiquorum. We decided to have the Latin language, which is actually our common language between French and Italian. So this project actually aims at building a multilingual online database. So it's something like, of course, the project diagram for documents with a musical notation. So an online database of the archaeological remains of musical instruments from the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman civilizations. Of course, it's only a start. It will take some time, but if we can, afterwards we can add Mesopotamia, Orient, Etruscan world, and so on. So I will briefly present you the main principles, the fair principles of the database. Then I will introduce you to the software we use, which is Eurist, which is actually developed, sustained in Sydney, at the University of Sydney, but also here at the MICHA, in the platform on Humanité Numérique, because we have a staff who is dealing with digital humanities here. Then I will present you the dataset of instruments related to this conference. That's this small corpus of instruments found in sanctuaries with mystery cults. Then show the database, how we enter the data into the database, and then conclusion about our project. So this database is entering the what we call in French the ecosystem Humanum. Humanum for Humanité Numérique, that is digital humanities, which is the big French national infrastructure of research, which gives us some means, some financial and people means to do our research. So you have just here a selection of the main possibilities given by Humanum to the researchers in France. Isidore, which is a browser, Nakala, which is a store for pictures, but to publish them, not to publish, so they are on public status, not private. ShareDocs, which is actually for private documents. GitLab, which is a laboratory, an online laboratory with, so I will show you, but we have issues and we can comment issues, so it's to organize the job. So Humanum has worked for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years on the data life cycle to provide softwares for every step of the data life cycle. You have here, so sorry, it's in French, but you have the whole life cycle of data from the the organization of the job first, then the collection of data, then the treatment, how to preserve them, to publish them, and then to reuse them. So that data life cycle. And for each step, we have some solutions which are provided by Human. So we are following the FAIR principles of the open science, so-called fairness. FAIR is the acronym for F, findable, that is something which should be findable by human beings and machines. So we'll have a permanent and unique identifier like DOI, digital object identifier, and of course well-documented metadata on all our instruments. Then A for accessible, that is easy to understand. This is a question also of licenses, open science licensing, I will show you. And the question of hosting entity. Then interoperable, I for interoperable, which means that we have to reflect on the web semantics if we use control vocabulary or if we use rather relational database and so on. So data models made of relation is created by, is sister of, was found by, etc., etc. And finally, R for reusable, that is, we must have common standards with other databases to interact with each other. So the modelization of data is really very important, and that's, I would say, the issue of our times now, of digital times. In order to query all of your data like you want through filters and facets, and of course these are possibilities given by the software we are using, which is Jurist, to create meaningful relations between different kinds of data, persons, of course, archaeologists, for example, places, for the place where the instruments were found, unearthed, or the places where they are preserved, objects, dates of the instruments, but also dates of the acquisition of the excavation, and so on. Life events, because we can speak about life events of a musical instrument from the birth, actually, which is the production, to, I wouldn't say the death, but its second, third, fourth life till the museum. Then share your data with your peers so that everyone can understand your data, which takes time. Actually, I will show you the database, which is actually not yet finished because we are still working on some aspects, because we made the choice to reflect really deeply on each step before we enter all the data. Then connect and compare easily your data set with other researchers, either on the same topic, on the same discipline. And that's why actually I really wanted to show you this database, because we need you actually if you have any data on these music instruments. And of course, save the data. So what is Jurist? Jurist, as I told you at the beginning, is a software actively developed and sustained by the University of Sydney, especially by Jan Johnson, who is an archaeologist and engineer, and who had to build a database for his own research, and decided to open the code, the informatic code, to give it to the community of researchers. And it came, I won't explain the steps, but it came to France through a consortium of Humanum, which is Paris Time Machine. And now, so it's widely spread in the French community and even international community. There is a community in Greece, for example. And many people are working on this software and always are improving it in collaboration, of course, with Jan Johnson. To say, on last Friday, I was in touch with Jan in a seminar, so we are really discussing everything regularly. And actually, if you need something which is not yet in Jurist, you can ask Jan, and they work. There are some people who work on this improvisation, and we are improving all together this software. So Jan is a researcher specialized in mapping geographic and historic data, and you will see that URIS provides some tools which are very useful for mapping the data. And one important thing is that it's really a tool made for digital humanities and social sciences. So it's quite easy to use for us. And I know that some people in the room have programming skills, but it doesn't require. So for the mortals, it's quite useful. So the main URIS features are the following. So you can access your data through a web interface. That's actually the plus and the minus, because the plus is that everything is saved at every step. The problem is when you are in a storeroom of a museum in the underworld of storerooms, and you don't have any connection, of course you cannot work. So we are working on a kind of software offline. Then, of course, like in any database, you can add, modify fields, manage term lists with drop-down menus, or import and structure data through a relational database. That is record linking, like mother of, equivalent to, found in, produced by, excavated by, of course, in the field of archaeology. So you are really building a database which makes the relations between all the data you may have on instrument. That is just here an example: materials, objects, persons, conservation, places, books, periodicals. Of course, we integrate the bibliography in our database, archaeological context, and so on. And one interesting feature of URIS is to provide a network diagram, so you can see how your database is modelized. So here is just an example, but actually, as I told you, the database is quite empty at this stage, but it's full of bibliographical records that will tell you we can import from Zotero bibliography to URIS the data. So I imported all the data I had on ancient Greek instruments. So this is actually the diagram of rather not the objects, but rather the publications. So we can work collaboratively on record templates, export in different formats like XML, CSV, and so on, archive the data, and as I told you, visualize it online with maps, graphs, fast searches, timeline, crosstabs, network diagrams. Because another feature of URIS is that you can build quite easily a website from the database. I would say one click. Not so easy, maybe 15 minutes, but it goes quickly. So, for example, for a map, you have here the two Aulos fragments from Sparta. Nothing to do with mystery cults here, but it's my example I have ready. So you can see two Aulos fragments from Sparta on the map. So the Riemann data set is made of 9 tables, which are called headings in URIS, and around 60 columns, fields in URIS. And the 9 tables are file, that is our file, our record, the typology of instruments, which is very important. We had to work on this classification many months. From the Hornbostel-Sachs classification, but with some adaptation. The description of the data, the museum data, the provenance, of course, of the instrument, the date of when it was made, the technical data, the bibliography, and pictures, as well as media. So the corpus for today is made of the votive instruments found in sanctuaries. This is all the instruments found in sanctuaries with different colors, and we are focusing on the mysteries of Ptonian gods, which are here in yellow. So this is actually this this map. I will briefly comment it. So we are starting from the Kaberion of Lemnos. So we haven't spoken, I think, till now from the Kabeiroi, which were also a very important cult with mysteries in antiquity, in Greek antiquity, and in the Kaberion of Lemnos, the Italian excavations found some fragments of Aulos. Of course, they are not so wonderful, but very interesting. Unfortunately, the context is not very well known because it's actually made of different artifacts coming from different periods, archaic, classical, Hellenistic times. It's not exactly garbage, but it's probably it's not a votive deposit made by purpose. It's just the evolution of the sanctuary. But so we have these fragments which were published actually by Luigi Beschi some 20 years ago. Then we have a question we asked on these instruments is how to classify them. So I just show you here the result of our work on so considering the Hornbostel Sachs classification, so the Ethnomusicological Classification, and so we used it, we arranged it for, because for some instruments, from some ancient instruments, it was not that appropriate or maybe not enough precise for our purposes. But so we have to range actually our instruments in this classification. So you have here the classifications of aerophones, and we use actually also the revised version of Febo-Guizzi, their colleague specialized also in ethnomusicology. So the Aulos found his place. So you have here. Still with Kabeiroi, from the Kaberion not of Lemnos but of Thebes, near Thebes, also 5th century BC, we have this bell, which is very interesting because it was inscribed with this ivy leaf decoration for the handle, and it is inscribed with, so the inscription Purias Kabeiro kai paidi, Purias to the Kabeiros and to the boy, because in Thebes, particularly, there was only one Kabeiros. I won't go into details with these gods, which are who probably have an Anatolian origin. And in Lemnos, there are 4, and considered as the 4 sons of Hephaestus. But in Thebes, there are only one who is accompanied with a pais, so a young boy, who is pouring the wine and so on. So you have this wonderful fragment of Skyphos found in Thebes, now in Athens, with the name, so you can read Kabeiros, so the great god Kabeiros, and the pais who is close to him. Again, we had to find the place to range the bells. And this is one of the most important issues of our corpus, because unfortunately, in Greece, there are not so many bells, but in the Gallo-Roman world and the Roman world generally, we have a very, very, very full corpus of bells. And actually, tomorrow in the Archaeological Museum, you will see bells, because bells were found in Argentoratum, Strasbourg, as everywhere. I was talking to yesterday about this symbol actually coming from not Melpeia, sorry, it's from Dimitsana, from the early 5th century, and which is inscribed. So I showed you yesterday the 2 main interpretations, the old interpretations actually, because it may read Kamun etus et Akora, that was the first proposal, Kamun sacrifice to Kore, and the second proposal was Kamo hun etus et Akora, Kamo sacrifice the pig to Kore. But specialists of the Akkadian language, because we are in Arcadia, could explain actually that we should read Kamo hun unetuse, sorry, for an etuse, this is a typical Akkadian feature, Takora. So there is no pig in this story, Because of course there is, it's known that for Persephone and Demeter, will you sacrifice a pig? So of course this idea influenced the reading of the inscription. Actually now, thanks to linguistical studies, we can say that it's easily Kamo, which is a female name dedicated to Kore. And finally, in the Persephonium of Lokri Epizephiri, we have this fragment of Aulos, which is also inscribed with 2 letters. Lucia Lepore read them as iota, nu, and as musical signs. I prefer personally reading Ie, for like Ie Payan, not Payan here, but Ie is an invocation quite obvious in any cults of Greece. And of course, there is the Aulos from Selinus, one of the last discovered Aulos published by Angela Bellia and Clemente Marconi. And now, so the Aulos found in the Temple R, the Temple R is interpreted now as a temple for, probably a Malophoros or some. There is already a Malophoros sanctuary in Selinus, and we have actually another Aulos fragment here. And the Temple R, which is here, is also interpreted because of the other findings as another sanctuary of a goddess, Malophoros, Kurotrophos, something like that. So, well, I see time is going on. So I'm just now finishing by showing actually the database with the example of the bell of the Caberion of Lemnos. Okay. Oh, sorry, I have just. Okay. 1 second, please. Okay, so here you have. So the this is a multilingual database, but not everything is multilingual. So this data is, sorry, in French, but it's only the data related to the file, to the record, so number of record, creation date, and so on. Actually, we put the creation date and the first author of the file, of the record, but these informations are automatically also generated by URIS. We just put them to have under the eyes, if I may say, but you can have from URIS itself. So. More interesting, so the typology, which is so this classification of instruments from hornbostel sacs, and I put into the administrative part of the database the control vocabulary in the 3 languages. So you have it here in English, for example. As you can see, you have here the Italian and here the French. And then some links on the ancient names when we have them. So for example, Kodon in Greek or Tintinabulum in Latin. And always, of course, because of interoperability, the number in the classification hornbostel sacs, which is also in the classification, which is in the again in the administrative part of the database. Then description, general description, eventual inscriptions, and I want to show you that in URIS you can perfectly put some Greek text because it's a Unicode, so no problem. Then even possibly decorations, so here this shape in ivy leaf, and of course similar records and so on. So it's only to show you the file. Of course the record is not complete at that now. So the museum data, so the institution here, so because the bell is at the British Museum, and so this is really a relational database because from you have the organization, and when you click on this organization, you have the data of the organization, where it is with geolocalization and so on and so on. And every data you want to put the foundation of the British Museum, I don't know, who is the curator, etc., the department, etc., etc. Of course, the inventory number, the date of acquisition, the mode of acquisition, every data which is very important for archaeologists. And some notes, the state of conservation, restorations, and a link, possible link to the museum database, which does exist actually for the British Museum. Then provenance, and again, relational database with a link to the place here, so the Cabirian of Thebes, and if you click here, so you have the data, especially the geolocalized data, so you can show where it is exactly here on the map. Cavirio Thebon here. And remarks on datation. So again, we use the controlled vocabulary for the periods. For the moment, we use the vocabulary which is on Open Teso in France, because it has all the periods of antiquity, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman. We wanted also use maybe Periodo, which is another repository, but the problem is that it does exist quite well for the ancient Greek world, but not yet for the Egyptian and Roman world. So for the moment, we use the one of Open Teso. And then technical data. This the point we are dealing with by now. It's the classification of materials, because there is one on Open Teso, but it's not enough precise, especially with new archaeometrical research on instruments, because Sibyl made some analysis from on the instruments of the Louvre Museum, and she published recently a paper on this, and so we had to add all the woods which were used for instruments, for example. And finally, bibliography. And so you can, as I told you, you import from Zotero all the bibliography you have, and you can here have it. So the bell was published actually in the catalogue of the bronzes of the British Museum, and also the catalogue of the inscriptions of the British Museum. So I put here, I realized I made a small mistake. It should be in the database, in the field database of museum, but here you have the link to the database of the British Museum. And finally, you can put pictures. So here is our bell, but for the moment it's in the database, but not to avoid that the database is too heavy. We will share the pictures from Nakala when they are published and open published, and if not, on other databases like Archimage for the French School at Athens, or we will keep them in a shared docs field dossier to have them for scientific purposes. Okay, I will stop there because I was a bit long, but I'm not sure there are many questions. It was really just to show you our work on this database. And again, this is mainly, we are asking you to help us if you have any data on music instruments. Of course, the idea is as much as possible to go to the museums, to see them, to measure them, because from a searcher or a scholar to another one, we may not make the measurements as the same way. Stefan did a great job actually to on how to make photos, especially for alloy. So this is really this is a team, but you are all of this team, if I may say. This is really we need you. So as I told from the beginning. So thank you very much. And if there is any question, or please.
Thank you, Sylvain. Please. Please, yeah.
It's fantastic to see this, and I know that Marco Sciascia has just been measuring all the Egyptian instruments in the Torino Museum, and I'll be visit off to him, and he has wonderful photographs and superb measurements, so I will try and make sure that all that data gets in your
With
direction.
great pleasure.
Stefan,
Very
yes.
detailed question. If we have Unatusa die Korwai, this doesn't mean Munetuse, right? It's not the object which is dedicated, which would be funny with the stem tuo, but it would rather be a note that she did some sacrifice and in addition dedicated this piece.
That's a question of Akkadian language. In some inscriptions in Akkadian language, anatuo means anatitemi, actually.
I found one other inscription, and this might be a similar case.
Okay.
Thank you, Stefan. Any other question? You are still on the impression of this massive database, which was our pandemic job. Yeah. And which requires, yes, as Sylvain told you, all your help and so. Okay. We are on time. Perfect. Thank you again, Sylvain. Now there is a lot of people, so at the beginning of this session, I thanked Sylvain for all his effort for welcoming us with such a wonderful accommodation and atmosphere and scientific level. So now, which are all of you here, we can thank him again. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now it's time for go to Brazil with Fabio Vergara Cerqueira from the University of Pelotas. Fabio is a very specialist of musical iconography, and he hosted many conferences at his university. And in particular, today he will speak about Apulian sistrum and death in Etheliot vases, 4th century BC. Is this one? Okay. No, finish. Stop. Okay.
Thanks.
Need to talk. Need to hear. Yeah. First, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here among you after these 2 terrible years, and my personal congratulations and thanks at the same time to Sylvain. Okay. I organized a preliminary catalog of the representations of the so-called Apulian system. I won't go here into the discussion of which was the correct ancient or modern denomination of this instrument. Okay, I would say Apulian system or sistrum. Okay, the discussion is important, but that's not my subject today. So a catalog of the representations of the so-called Apulian system in Apulian vase painting, comprehending 211 vases, from which 139 Apulian red figure vases, 42 Apulian Gnatian vases, 22 Campanian vases, 7 Paestan vases, and 1 Siciliote. It's interesting to observe that Campanian, Paestan, and Siciliote ones were produced under what Trendle calls Apulianizing influence. Most of the scenes representing the Apulian system has its iconography. Here it is. Yep. I chose this vase for the Würzburg colleague. Most of these scenes representing the Apulian system has its iconography linked with the amorous spheres, including different kinds of scenes as courtship scenes, scenes of prenuptial rites, or of rites under the auspice of Aphrodite and Eros, mainly associated with women, although there are not few examples connected with boys and satyrs. In most cases, the Apulian system is not played. The figures hold it, or it's deposited resting on the floor, leaning on a piece of furniture, or suspended in the field, as if hanging on the wall. The fact that it's not being played properly makes the interpretation a little bit more difficult. However, in a small number of ways, to be precise in 5 examples, we can identify the musical performance of this instrument, eliminating the doubts that might persist regarding the musical nature of this object. Here being played. The Apulian system is represented in an important number of scenes with funerary monument. Hence, we can deduce the situations in which it occurs, as well as its uses and as well as its uses as in the funerary cult, either as a musical instrument or as a sacred instrument, like a part of the sacra. Furthermore, one can deduce also some mystical symbolisms and gender connections associated with it. I work here with a series of 34 Italiote vases, being 26 Apulian vases and 8 Campanian vases. It means that about 25% of the total of 139 red figure vases with sistrum are associated with a funerary monument, actually associated with 2 different architectural types of tombs, the naiscos, like you see here, or the stele, the tombstone. This undoubtedly indicates its funerary connection, be it symbolic or ritualistic. And here also a musical connection. However, this does not give the sistrum an intrinsically funerarial meaning or functionality, taking into account that the representations related to the love sphere predominate consistently when representing the sistrum, reaching almost 3/4 of the total, 100 between 139. Here I'm not counting the Gnatia vase because most of them don't have so iconographical narrative, just the object. The series of scenes with sistrum and funerary monuments branches into scenes with stele, like this one here, making up to 8 vases, being 7 Apulian and 1 companion vase, and scenes with Naiscos totalizing 26 vases, being 19 Apulian vases and 7 companion vases. So a ratio of approximately 1 steel scene to 3.5 Naiscos scene. Approximated, not precise numbers. Of the totality of the series of 34 vases, 16 have reliable information about the provenience. 7 comes from Cumae in Campania, 4 from Canosa in South Daunia, 2 from Ruvu in North Peucesia, 2 from Celle del Campo in Central Peucesia, and 1 from Conversano in North Messapia. But the number is much smaller with regard to more accurate information about the finding contexts. It's more complete regarding, for example, the tomb found in Via Bari in Conversano in 1991, but less detail concerning discoveries from the 19th century, such as the Varese Hypogeum in Canosa, and the so-called Persian tomb, also in Canosa, where comes the Darius painter base. For example, the Gabrici tomb in Cuma. Some very important examples of this series, 8 vases, belong to private collections still now, or were located in the antiquities market, so that their scientific publicizing is more restricted. One of these vases that was in Geneva, now is in Madrid. 2015 was in Geneva market, and was purchased in 2018 for the Madrid Museum, and very good published by recently dead Paloma Cabrera. I named her because I like a lot her studies, and she died last year, so Paloma Cabrera. This limitation regarding the archaeological context in which the vases were found reinforces the importance of a systematic analysis of the iconography and of the shape that supports this image. In the series as a whole, one observes that the hydra prevails, 12 cases, followed by the volute crater, basically the so-called cratere a mascheroni, with 10 cases. With smaller numbers, the series also includes 6 lutrophoroi, 5 amphorae, and 1 pellice. But if we look more closely, we will see that from the 12 hydria, 8 are companion vases, and further, that they are all Naiscocene, and that the hydria is the only form of vase used by companion painters in this series. On the other hand, we can see that the cratere a mascheroni is the favorite vase shape among Apulian painters when representing the sistrum outside the Naiscos. From a total of 16 Apulian vases, the cratere a mascheroni is used by them in 8 examples. There seems to be a factor of ethnicity, cultural ethnicity, opposing Apulian and Campanian painters with respect to the choice of the vase shape for scenes with Naiscos. So let's go to the Apulian sistrum next to the stele, like you see here. Yeah, the 2 vases here, over and down. Yeah, Apulian stele scenes are, in a certain way, heirs of the analogous scenes on the Attic white ground lectoi. These scenes resume the iconography scheme of the visit to the tomb, of the visit to the necropolis, to worship the dead at his tombstone. But they innovate in the treatment. The iconographic scheme of representation of the visit to the tomb, characteristic of the white ground lectors produced in Athens between 460 and 410, was based on 2 aspects. The presence of the stele, sometimes in addition to the steles, the painter represents in the background the tomb boss that you see here behind the stele. That's the mound of earth that covers the tomb, to which family members and friends go on certain dates to perform funeral rituals that made up Greek mourning. Second aspect, the presence next to the stele of the figure of a half-naked young man, sometimes a young woman, dressed woman, half-naked young man, as a rule seated at the base of the monument, represented not that the natural age of his or her death, but idealized in his youth and beauty, without the marks of old age, which consisted of a heroized form of the dead. This representation corresponded to the belief that during the visit, the deceased was present in his spiritual form. In a part of this series, the dead holds the lyra. In these scenes, those who attend the tomb bring offerings on trays, they perform gestures of deference, they deposit at the tomb objects, mainly lectoi, but also food, and also the visitors can be bringing the lyre as an offering. It is very meaningful that concerning Apulian vase painters, they do not represent the dead in the scenes of visit to the stele. The presence of the dead in the Apulian vase painting and also in Campanian vase painting is transferred, and also Lucanian that also present in the scenes. The presence of the dead is transferred to the Naiscos scenes and not in the stele scenes. There remains a doubt of what I'm saying here regarding the Campania Hydria now in Pasadena, the only Italiot vase with a scene of sistrum next to a stele, in which we see a female figure seated at the base of the stele and holding the musical instrument, and then with a comparison to the Attic scheme, we could think of the possibility that she could be the dead, although I think not. We may ask, would she be a woman taking part at the cult of the dead, as on Apulian vases, or would this female figure be a representation of the dead, as in the white ground lectus tradition? It's worth to remember that by this time, the Athenian ground lectoi should have already fallen into oblivion, since this Campanian Hydria, attributed by Trendle to the APZ painter, that means Apulianizing painter, was manufactured in Cumae in the Apulianizing style between 330 and 320, almost a century after the last white ground lectoi produced in Athens. And also remembering that the white ground is a form, white ground lectus is a form produced mainly to internal consumption, not that much to exportation. So people here didn't have so much contact with this form, although we have that memory among the craftsmen, painters and potters. Thus, these funerary stele scenes continue somehow the Attic vase painting tradition of representation, the ritual of visiting the tomb to honor the deceased, which is testified also in other iconographical supports, for example, as in a relief from Melos dating from 48-47. But the stele scenes now receive a completely different treatment, which must correspond to the local reconfiguration of funerary beliefs. This is even evident in the greater diversity and even originality of the objects brought by the characters for use in the ritual or for offering. We may have open or closed box of different sizes, bowls to support the ritual, whether bowls without handles, such as the common fialae, or the fialae with omphalos, very typical for South Italy. We may have the models with handle, the so-called patera, which resembles a modern frying pan. Very characteristic also for southern Italy. We may have jugs, the oinoque, for pouring oil on the monument, or trays to bring offerings such as eggs, fruit, or cakes. The large frequency of eggs among the offerings of typical vegetal elements such as a branch, a wreath of leaves, a wreath of flowers, ribbons or scarves to decorate the stele, objects such as mirror, fan, bow, and shield, that's symbolic for a condition of gender, of age, and of social status, which can assume a mystical function as part of the sacra, as an instrument of worship, or finally, a function as an offering to the dead. As an important part of the funerary material culture associated by the Apulian vase painting to the cult of the dead at the stele, we would highlight the Apulian sistrum, occasionally associated with the tympanum, just occasionally. But in these situations may suggest the presence of the Apulian sistrum may suggest the music performed during the Murnau ritual. In none of the scenes with visitation to the stele is there an association between the sistrum and a male figure in the visit to the stele. Yeah? In most cases, the sistrum is in the hands of women. In 7 scenes among the 8, yeah? Except for 2 situations in which it is leaning against the stele, supported by a base, or on a large canasta, which also serves as a seat for one of the girls. Yeah. Even in these 2 cases, however, due to physical nearness, the object is linked to female figures. Regarding the position, the women who hold the sistrum are evenly distributed. 5 are sitting and 4 are standing. The scenes in which the women with sistrum is standing also show a balanced distribution concerning her body position. In half of the scenes, she is standing in front of the monument, and in the other half, her body is in motion, like in the lower one here, right in the red, perhaps indicating 2 different situations of handling this object during the ritual. In the first case, for ritual purposes during the rite of to the deceased before the stele. In the second one, when she's running with it, used musically during the dance performed around the monument. Plutarch, in Alexander 15:4, gives us a description of a dance ritual around the tomb. When passing through the Hellespont, Alexander is said to have paid homage to Achilles, sprinkling the grave with oil and performing a festive ritual, when he and his companions danced naked around the grave, crowning it with garlands. Crowning the monument with garlands and sprinkling it with oil, as well as dancing, are actions present in the visit to the tomb on Apulian vases, in which the painter records the presence of the sistrum in the morning rituals. It is interesting to note that in the 3 vases in which the oinoque appears associated with the presence of the sistrum, the action of pouring oil on the monument is associated with a boy. In turn, the placement of crowns next to the monuments or of ribbons to decorate the stele appear as both masculine and feminine actions. As for the music of the sistrum, the painter set it as a female function in the visit to the tomb. Naiscos different. The women who hold the sistrum in 5 cases also have another object in their hand at the same time, like a fiale, box, another tray, for example. The woman who is moving the women who are moving, the women who are moving, taking part at this procession or at the dancing corps around the stele, are brandish the sistrum in a gesture that allows us to thinking about its musical use being shaken. The same may be said of the woman who is brandishing it sitting at the base of the stele. However, when the sistrum is static, stopped, resting on the ground or on a base, or in the hand of a woman who holds it facing downwards, at this point in the ritual, it has no musical function. The Barling Amphora shows the sistrum in 2 situations. In the hand of a woman in movement, participating in the dance ritual, right? And also deposited on the floor, supported by the base on the stele in the center. In the first case, it fulfills a musical role, the sistrum. In the second case, there are two possibilities of interpretation. For a moment, it was set aside in a secondary place for no longer fulfilling a role in the rite, or it was deposited next to the stele as an offering to the dead man or woman because it was an object associated with him or her in life. As we will see later on, the Naiskos scenes help to understand this issue. When the woman performs no clear action, only holding it in front of the stele, in the presence of other objects, it is possible to think that its inclusion among the sacred cult instruments is due to its symbolic and mystical character. The same as with the mirror. While the presence of the mirror next to the tomb is linked to its Dionysian funerary mysticism, the sistrum, in this situation, as a sacred object, would have a symbolic and mystical role associated with the goddess Aphrodite, who, in the context of Apulian religiosity, plays a role in the so-called funerary nuptial eschatology. Now let's go to Apulian sistrus in Naiskos scenes. Here it's just the Naiskos scene with the Apulian sistrum. Yeah, okay. The Naiskos scene are an innovation of the Apulian vase painting, concerning vase painting, probably conceived by the Eleupersis painter and the Lycurgus painter in the second quarter of the 4th century. This is not an isolated invention, as the Eleupersis painter and his associated painters and potters created a whole morphological, decorative, iconographic program that became canonical for the large Apulian cratere a mascherone. This program included, first, in the column-shaped handles, the replacement of the traditional volutes with masks, more usually the mask of Io with little horns. Second, the completion of the handle base in the shape of a swan's head. Third, the decoration of the neck of the crater with a female head, Aphrodite mainly, among plant and floral motifs with very vivid colors. Sometimes the presence of birds, and with time and the desire of variation, replacing the female head with a male head from Adonis, often Adonis or Eros. 4. The Naiskos, which can alternate with the architectural representation of the palace of Hades. Left, the palace, you see, open in the sides. Right, the Naiskos closed, so the painters do the difference. The convention of represented the characters inside the structure in white color is a 50th characteristic. And 6, the possibility of alternating in the two sides of the vase, the Naiskos scene with a scene of steel on the opposite side of the vase. So the edicule, this small building, present in the funerary scenes is a small temple called Naiskos or Heron, which would consist of a home for the dead in the afterlife. Considering the vase painting, the Naiskos, this small funerary temple, is an invention of the Tarentine school that emerged shortly before the middle of the 4th century and was assimilated by workshops in Apulian countryside and later on by Lucanic and Campanian workshops. There are still uncertainties about the relationship between the Naiskos as an iconographic scene and the reality of Tarentine grave architecture. Would it be a form of tomb developed in Tarentum and taken as a reference by vase painters? Or, on the contrary, was it initially a form imagined by the painters only to be conceived later as a concrete funerary monument? Third hypothesis, would it be a representation that took as a model the funerary tombstones in vogue in 4th century in Athens and other places in Greece, which represent the dead man or the dead woman and family inside a temple-like architectural structure? According to our current knowledge, there is a gap of about half century between the first representations of funerary temple on vases and its archaeological evidenced architectural achievement. The most ancient archaeological remains date from Naiscos date from the end of the 4th century, whilst the vases of the Eupersis painter and Lycurgus painter are located around 360 BC. But what would this little temple be? Was it a form of funerary architecture? Or is it the dead man's or woman's imaginary home beyond the grave, similar to the palace of Hades? Imagination or materiality? More likely, a mixture of both. Scenes with Naiscos follow a convention in the use of colors. The figures inside the monument are, as a rule, represented in white in addition to the with addition of white pigment, whereas the characters who attend to the tomb to pay homage to the deceased are represented with the red figure technique, therefore with the reddish tone that correspond to the skin of the living people. And why the white color? Different explanations are proposed. First hypothesis, the white color would indicate that the figure is part of a funerary monument, like the marble color. It would be a statue representing the dead, made of marble, as well as the architectural structure. Second hypothesis, the color would indicate the condition of the dead, a kind of spiritual body, ghost, that would inhabit the realm of Hades, but could also inhabit the Naiscos built in the necropolis to be his residence, there where the corpse had been buried. I see no incompatibility between the two hypotheses. With the white color, it was said that the deceased was there, even if you couldn't see him. In these scenes, it's necessary to observe two parallel but independent narrative realities. It's important to consider this to understand the situation of the system, even if these two realities are articulated with each other. So you have the reality of the dead inside the Naiscos, and the other reality, that's the reality of the living outside the Naiscos. Inside, it's a spiritual world, or just a marble sculpture. Outside, it's mourning. It's the obligations of the living to their dead. It is the rituals due to the dead which express the uniqueness of local funerary beliefs with a very unique mix between the realm of Dionysus and of Aphrodite. What happens outside the Naiscos is similar to what is seen in the scenes of the cult of the dead in front of the stele. So on the days established by the religion's liturgy of mourning, relatives and friends, men and women, go to the necropolises to pay their respects to the recently deceased ones. Therefore, they are two distinct iconographic schemes that refer to the same ritual. So the Naiscos scene, however, give the painter more freedom to combine them with narratives of mythological inspirations or theatrical influence, such as Niobe's petrification scenes or the funerals of Patroclus, to mention just two of them. Painters can also play more with the spatial arrangement of characters. They usually follow a plan for distributing the figures, always having the temple as a central element. The figures are positioned at 3 levels in relation to the edicula, in this case here. So below it, on the side, close to the base, on the side near to the upper structure. This is a convention for suggesting perspective. The former are the ones over, the ones under are in front of the monument, the intermediary group inside of the monument, and over are back of the monument. It is the way to represent that the figures are around the tomb. As they are more complex scenes than those of worship in front of the stele, there may be a greater diversity of objects in the same scene. But in general, the sacra, the offerings, and the ritualistic gestures are repeated. But some objects, such as shields and calatos, are more typical for Naiscos scene, and it doesn't happen in stele scenes. In such Naiscos scenes, the systems can occur inside or outside the funerary temple, which implies different meanings. When the sistrum is inside, like here, it is placed in relation. It's placed there in relation to the dead, with what he practiced, the dead practiced in life, or how the living ones want to represent it, the dead in the dead person in the death. And moreover, it is also in relation with what the dead person would do or take with him or with her to the death, to the afterlife. And when outside the temple, it is in relationship with the cult, with the worship to the dead, with the objects used during the tribute to the dead. Altogether, we have 26 vases of inside and outside Naiscos. 10 inside, in 10 vases, the sistrum is inside the Naiscos and 16 outside. Unlike the series of scenes with steel, in which the contribution of the companion workshops is not very expressive. This series of scenes with Naiscos has a more significant contribution from companion workshops, 7 companion vases and 19 Apulian ones, making up more than a third of the series. So let's go to the Apulian sistrum inside the Naiscos. Focusing on the scenes in which the sistrum is represented inside the Naiscos, hints linked to the dead, we can see that it is a mostly companion approach. Among the 10 vases classified in our study, 7 are of companion production, linked mainly to the Apulianizing workshop that operated in Cumae, linked to the CA painter that produced between 340 and 330 BC, and to the APZ painter that produced between 330 and 320 BC. On the other hand, if we look at the scenes in which the sistrum is outside the Naiscos, all the 16 vases are Apulian, no one is companion. This shows an overwhelming Apulian preference for showing the sistrum outside the edicula, and on the contrary, the preference of Kuma-based painters for representing the system inside the edicula. At the same time, it also shows that the Apulianizing painters not only bring to Campania Apulianizing iconography schemes, but modulated them, adapting them into their original singularities, since the insertion of the sistrum in funerary scenes is quite different from the Apulian imagetic system. With regard to the gender, in the 10 examples of sistrum inside the Naiscos, in 9 of them the sistrum is associated with a female figure. This is a clear sign that having this object in the afterlife is something expected for a woman, possibly because it's an object that in earthly life was more appropriated to female world as a musical instrument. But one cannot despise the Amphora recently in the Geneva market and now in Madrid's Museo Arqueológico Nacional, in which the sistrum is inside the Naiscos on the floor behind the dead man, who is represented as a young man with striglis in his hand. This invites us to reflect the presence of the sistrum inside the temple for this Apulian painter, the specific Apulian painter in this vase, would not necessarily mean that this object was directly part of the material life of this dead man represented as a young man when he was alive, since it is unlikely that he played it as a musical instrument in his daily life. Its presence may mean that the sistrum's mystical force is wished for his afterlife. So there is a mystical force connected to Aphrodite, connected to the sistrum. In other words, so that he can receive the grace of Aphrodite and can be graced in eternal life with the conjugal love, which he may not have had in life if he had died prematurely and still single. And how do painters represent the sistrum inside the Naiscos? Of the 10 cases, so first, in 4 cases, a woman who represents the dead holds the sistrum. Sorry. Here. Oh, here was the vase that I was describing now, sorry. And now what I'm talking. The woman inside the naiscos holds the instrument in her hand. In 4 examples, it hangs on the wall. In one Apulian vase, it is on the floor, and in another, it is supported on the legs of the woman who represents the dead woman. This is the case here. Then we have 2 different situations. First, the sistrum is highlighted, linked direct to the dead woman, being held by her or supported by her. Second, it is set on a secondary level, linked to the scene represented inside the naiscos, but not necessarily belonging to the deceased. However, it is associated with a concept of good death. In the first case, with the sistrum in the hand or on the leg, it means that it is imagined that the women after the death will continue to use this musical instrument which accompanied her in life. She may have played the sistrum in different occasions, on visiting the tomb of a loved relative or friends, the examples we saw here. But now, done in some ritual to Aphrodite, or here the example, accompanying a dance, or being one of the musical possibilities of the wedding feast, like among the 4 instruments you see, it's not played at this moment, but in some moment it has been played during the wedding feast. In this sense, we even have an amazing companion vase that shows the possibility, not testified in the almost 200 Apulian vase, but in the few companion, yes, of public performances with sistrum, and that there could have been musicians who have been professionally specialized in the execution of the instrument. And maybe they discovered that it was not that much good, and that's it's the only example that exists. Is this different form of vase here in Naples, where you see many scenes of undoubtedly musical instruments, and then you have this like a guitaroidos with a sistrum, and he even has in his hand a plectrum. I think you did deserve a special reflection, and I won't go deep into this, but I like to show it to you. A hydria from Cume, housed in Rome, from which I don't have good. Shows here what you see. The woman playing the sistrum in the afterlife, and so there was one more face. I will go to the conclusion. Conclusion. It's one paragraph. Our systematic observation of Italiot vases represented the iconographic series of sistrum next to the funerary monuments indicates a polysemy in its representation within a field of ambivalent meaning. When the vase painter represents a woman inside the naiscos playing the sistrum, for instance, when she's plucking it, the painter shows that some women could dedicate themselves to this instrument during their lives, to the point of wanting it to be remembered after their death. In some still scenes, we see women moving and brandishing the sistrum as participants in a dance around the monument, as a way of worshipping the dead. At this time, there would be a musical use of the instrument. As Gerhard, one of the first to observe this leather-shaped device, would not be wrong when in the 19th century he assigned it a role in the cult of the dead. But its role in these cults could also take the form of a ritualistic instrument, like the mirror, the fan, and the patera, handled through ceremonial gestures in front of the stele or the naiscos in a moment that it was not used as a musical instrument. In this case, what counts is not its musical value, but its musical and symbolic strength, both linked to the realm of Aphrodite. This is why, when used as part of the sacra that instrumentalized the cult, the sistrum can be held by both men and women, and that is why it can also be used in the ritual given to the deceased of both sexes. When placed on the ground next to the monument, it's compatible to interpret that it was taken to the cult as an offering, either because it belonged in life to the deceased or because of its mystical power.
Thank you so much. So, after so many reflections about Apulian Sistra, we have time for one question, and then coffee. Yes, please.
A quick question. There was one. Thank you very much for this interesting combination. But I saw one of the vases where in the nice course there was also a red figure. You said usually the white ones, but there was one you went quickly through that was red.
Inside the nice course?
Yeah. I was wondering if you have an explanation for that.
Yeah. There are more. Most of them are white, in white. The figures inside the naiscos, but there are not few ones that are in red. I suppose it has to do with the fact that in Tarent and probably also in other Apulian places, it was much more usual than, for example, in Athens, to have terracotta life-size sculptures in funerary tombs. Then I interpret as this the reason why in a couple of examples you have the red figure there.